I was the black sheep everyone overlooked at family gatherings, until the day I inherited everything and watched them all come crawling back. For 28 years, I was the ghost at every family gathering. I was the lingering chill in a warm room, the unnoticed figure in the corner of group photos, the name that prompted a hesitant, "Oh, that's right," if mentioned at all. My presence was tolerated, my absence was preferred. I was Quinn, the black sheep, and my only crime was choosing a different path. While my cousins collected accolades for their conventional achievements, I could have discovered a new planet and they'd still ask when I was getting a real job. I remember one Thanksgiving with particular clarity. My cousin Theo, the doctor, had just completed his residency. The family orbited around him, a noisy, adoring solar system. Uncle Randall, his voice booming with pride, had his arms slung around Theo's shoulders. "This is my nephew, Theo, the doctor," he'd announce to anyone within earshot, his chest puffed out like a prize-winning rooster. "And my daughter, Ava, the lawyer." He'd beam, the very picture of paternal triumph. I was standing right beside him, holding an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon I'd brought as a hostess gift. I'd learned early that a cheap gift was just another reason to dismiss me, another piece of evidence for my supposed lack of substance. Uncle Randall's eyes, bright with pride for his children, slid over me without a flicker of recognition. I wasn't just overlooked, I was furniture. A bookshelf holding a bottle of wine. My great sin? I had dropped out of law school during my second year to start a tech company. In the hallowed halls of my family's esteem, this was tantamount to joining the circus. That my company, CloudSync Solutions, was not only thriving but pulling in 7 figures annually meant nothing. I wasn't a lawyer, a doctor, or a banker. Therefore, in their carefully constructed social hierarchy, I did not exist. "Quinn's just going through a phase," my mother would explain in a hushed, apologetic tone to curious relatives. This was 7 years after I'd landed my first $1 million client contract. "He'll come to his senses eventually and finish law school." The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The final nail in the coffin of my hope for acceptance was my own graduation. I'd earned a master's in computer science while working full-time on my startup, maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA despite 60-hour weeks. Proud, I shared the news in the family group chat, a photo of me in my cap and gown. The response was a void. Radio silence for 3 solid days. Meanwhile, when my cousin Finn was promoted to assistant manager at a local coffee shop, a job that paid barely enough to cover his phone bill, the family chat exploded. 47 congratulatory messages, 3 separate celebration dinner invitations, and a group gift of a gold watch for the successful businessman of the family. The irony was a bitter pill. At that point, I was employing 15 people. At Christmas dinners, my place was permanently set at the kids' table, wedged between a 7-year-old second cousin and the high chair, despite being 28 and older than half the adults present. At weddings, I was the one politely asked to step out of family photos. "Could you grab this for us, Quinn?" they'd ask, handing me their phones as if I were the hired help. I'd stand behind the camera, framing shots of their perfect, smiling family, my own DNA seemingly revoked. The conversations were the worst. They would talk around me, about me, as if I were an apparition. "Whatever happened to Quinn?" Aunt Veronica would ask my mother, her voice carrying across the dinner table while I sat 3 feet away, nursing a beer. "Oh, he's still doing that computer thing," my mother would reply with a dismissive wave of her hand, as if shooing a fly. "Playing around with websites or something." My website thing had just landed a contract with a Fortune 500 company. But why let facts interfere with a good, condescending narrative? The most pathetic part? I kept showing up. A stubborn, bruised part of my soul still hoped that this time would be different. That this time, someone would ask about my life with genuine interest, that their eyes would hold mine in a conversation for more than a fleeting second. It never happened. Then, Grandmother Iris died. I was the only one who visited her regularly at Sunset Manor, a sprawling care facility that smelled of antiseptic and faded memories. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m., like clockwork, I'd walk through those automatic doors carrying a small cooler. Inside were homemade chocolate chip cookies, Her favorite recipe, the one she taught me when I was 12 and spending summers at her house. The staff knew me by name. "Quinn's here for Mrs. Patterson," they'd announce over the intercom, and you could hear the genuine warmth in their voices. The nurses would update me on her condition, ask about my business, remember details about my life that my own family had forgotten. The rest of the family treated Grandmother Iris like a burdensome chore. Aunt Veronica visited twice in 5 years, both times to discuss financial planning. Uncle Randall sent extravagant floral arrangements on her birthday, but, during their brief, obligatory phone calls, would fumble when she asked about her own grandchildren. "Tell me about Quinn's company again," she'd say during our weekly chess games, her gnarled, steady hands moving pieces across the board. "The cloud storage thing." And I would explain it all. The client acquisition strategies, the server infrastructure, the upcoming expansion into mobile apps. Her eyes, still sharp and mischievous, would light up with genuine interest. She asked follow-up questions that proved she was not just listening, but processing, understanding. "You know," she'd say, leaning back in her recliner as I reset the chessboard, "I built the family construction business from nothing back in 1952. Started with your grandfather and a single pickup truck. Everyone said a woman couldn't run a construction company." A mischievous glint would appear in her eye. "Prove them all wrong, didn't I? Made more money than any of their husbands ever did." These were stories she shared only with me. At family gatherings, she'd sit quietly, observing the pageant of vanity. But with me, she was the vibrant, shrewd businesswoman she'd always been. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me once, capturing my bishop with a sly move of her knight. "Too stubborn to quit, too smart to fail." When I landed my biggest contract yet, a 3-year deal worth $2.4 million, she was the only one who grasped its significance. "That's empire-building money," she'd said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Don't let anyone convince you it's not." When she passed, I was the one holding her hand. The rest of the family was at Cousin Theo's engagement party, an event I hadn't been invited to, despite it being held at a country club where I'd pulled strings to get Theo his membership. I learned of her death through a cold, impersonal group text from my mother. "Mom passed this afternoon. Funeral arrangements TBD." When the lawyer, a Mr. Morrison, called for the reading of the will, I almost didn't go. The thought of another family event where I'd be marginalized was exhausting. But there was an unusual urgency in Attorney Morrison's voice. "Mr. Patterson," he'd said, "your grandmother was very specific. Your presence is required." The family packed into the law office of Morrison and Associates like vultures circling fresh carrion. The room was all dark mahogany and rich leather, an atmosphere that demanded whispers. Aunt Veronica had brought a leather portfolio with color-coded tabs. Uncle Randall was already discussing property tax implications with his wife in hushed, greedy tones. Cousin Ava was scrolling through luxury car websites on her phone, favoriting models she assumed she'd soon be able to afford. They had all assumed, as was tradition, that the estate, worth nearly $20 million, would be divided equally. The sprawling Victorian mansion, the diversified investment portfolios, the thriving construction business. Even split 12 ways, everyone would walk away a millionaire. I sat in my usual spot, the back corner, invisible. I watched them count unclaimed money, their faces masks of feigned sorrow over the woman who had to die to make them rich. Attorney Morrison cleared his throat and began reading in a dry, practiced monotone. The standard legal preamble droned on. Then he reached the dispositive provisions. "To my beloved family," he read, "I leave you exactly what you gave me in my final years." A confused murmur rippled through the room. Veronica stopped writing. Randall looked up from his mental calculations. "To my daughter, Veronica, who visited me twice in 5 years and forgot my last 3 birthdays, I leave my disappointment and best wishes for your future endeavors." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the distant tap-tap-tap of a keyboard from another office. "There has to be a mistake," Veronica stammered, her face bleached of color. Morrison continued, unperturbed. "To my son, Randall, who sent flowers once a year but couldn't remember which grandchildren belonged to which parents, I leave my profound sadness at your choices and hope that you will learn the value of presence over presents." Randall started to object, but Morrison held up a silencing hand. "To my grandchildren, Theo, Ava, Finn, and others who inherited their parents' priorities, I leave the same attention and care you showed me, which is to say, none whatsoever." The silence was now deafening, a physical weight in the room. To my grandson, Quinn, who held my hand every Tuesday for 6 years, who remembered my birthday with homemade cookies, who listened to my stories and shared his dreams, who was the only one who truly knew me as a person rather than a bank account, I leave everything else. My stomach plummeted through the floor. Everything else. The mansion, the portfolios, the business, everything they had been mentally dividing for the past hour. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "I have prepared individual letters for family members to be distributed at my discretion." He handed me a thick envelope marked, "For Quinn's eyes only," in Grandmother Iris's elegant, looping script. With trembling hands, I opened it. "My dear Quinn, if you're reading this, then my funeral is over and the vultures have gathered to pick over my bones. I'm sure they're surprised, but you shouldn't be. I've been watching this family for 93 years, and I know exactly who everyone is. You were the only one who saw me as a person. While they saw dollar signs, you saw a grandmother. While they calculated inheritance splits, you brought me cookies and asked about my childhood. They'll come for you now. They'll try every manipulation, every guilt trip, every sob story. They'll claim family loyalty while demonstrating none. Be ready. I've left specific instructions with Mr. Morrison about any attempts to contest this will. Let's just say I've been documenting their absence and other financial indiscretions for years. You built something beautiful from nothing just like I did. Don't let them tear it down. All my love, Grandmother Iris. P.S. The construction business books are in the basement safe. The combination is your birthday in reverse. I think you'll find some interesting reading about certain family members' business loans that were never repaid." The room exploded. "This is ridiculous!" Aunt Veronica shrieked, her composure shattering. She was clearly not in her right mind. "We'll contest this." Uncle Randall roared, his face a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is elder abuse." Through the chaos, Attorney Morrison sat perfectly calm. When the shouting subsided, he spoke softly. Mrs. Patterson anticipated this. He opened a file folder. Medical evaluations, cognitive assessments from the last 6 months. Every single one confirms she was of completely sound mind. He put on his reading glasses. "She also asked me to inform you that any attempt to contest this shall result in the immediate release of certain family financial records she maintained, documentation of unpaid loans, questionable business practices, and tax irregularities that would undoubtedly interest the IRS." The fight drained from them instantly. It was a different silence now, the silence of predators realizing they've been caught in their own trap. Veronica looked ill. Randall was sweating profusely. "She wouldn't have," Veronica whispered, but the conviction was gone. "She was a businesswoman for 70 years, Morrison replied evenly. "She kept excellent records." Just like that, it was over. I walked out of that office in a daze, the legal documents feeling like lead weights in my hands, making me one of the wealthiest people in the state and the sole keeper of secrets that could destroy the family that had spent decades eroding my sense of self. The phone call started before I even reached my car. "Quinn, honey, we need to talk. Family dinner tonight at my house. 7 p.m. sharp. Aunt Veronica." "Hey buddy, haven't heard from you in ages. Wanna grab coffee tomorrow?" "My treat." "Uncle Randall. Congrats on the inheritance, men. We should celebrate. Drinks on me. Cousin Theo." The dinner invitation was a summons disguised as hospitality. A part of me wanted to ignore them, to retreat and process this seismic shift in private. But the part of me that had been invisible for 28 years wanted to witness their desperation firsthand. I arrived at Veronica's opulent home to find them all waiting. And for the first time in my life, every head turned toward me when I entered. Not past me. Not toward someone more important. Toward me. "Quinn." Veronica lunged at me with a hug, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. "You look wonderful. How's business?" I've been meaning to ask about your company for months. It was the first time she'd asked about my work in 15 years. We've all been talking, Uncle Randall said, his voice uncharacteristically warm as he guided me to the head of the dining table, a seat I had never once been offered. We're so proud of you. Cousin Theo nodded with disturbing enthusiasm. I was just telling everyone how smart you've always been. Remember when you built that computer from scratch? I always knew you were going to be successful. I stared at him, deadpan. You called it a waste of time and broke it on purpose. His smile flickered for a nanosecond. Kids, right? We didn't understand genius when we saw it. The revisionist history was breathtaking. For an hour, they performed a stunning retcon of our shared past, rewriting every slight as encouragement, every snub as a misunderstanding. I could see the calculation in their eyes, the strategic deployment of each hollow compliment. The thing is, Aunt Veronica said, setting down her wine glass with theatrical concern, we're worried about you handling such a large inheritance alone. It's overwhelming. Life-changing money requires careful management, Randall agreed. We want to help. Family should stick together, Theo chimed in. Then Cousin Ava, the lawyer, produced a folder. Maybe we could form a family trust, she suggested, spreading documents across the table. Pool the inheritance for everyone's benefit. Share the responsibility and the rewards. There was the real agenda. Grandmother Iris would have wanted us to share, Veronica said, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. She always believed in family unity. She wouldn't want her decision to divide us, Randall added. Blood is thicker than water. I almost laughed. You're absolutely right, I said, and their faces lit up with relief. Money shouldn't divide families. I paused, letting their hopes solidify. In fact, I've learned so much about family this week. I pulled out my phone and opened a voice memo app I'd used for years, initially to review conversations and figure out what I was doing wrong socially. It turned out to be a repository of their cruelty. For instance, I said, I learned that Aunt Veronica called me a basement-dwelling loser who'll never amount to anything just last Christmas. Would you like to hear the recording? Her face went sheet white. Her wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Or Uncle Randall's theory that I'm probably autistic because I don't understand social cues and can't take a hint. I have that one too. He began to stammer, his confidence crumbling. My personal favorite, I continued, scrolling, is Cousin Ava explaining to her sorority sisters why she doesn't include me in family photos. Something about not wanting to be associated with family embarrassments and how my presence might hurt her social media image. The room was utterly still. For 6 years, I said, my voice quiet but clear, I watched Grandmother Iris ask where everyone was. Every Tuesday, she'd look toward the door, hoping one of you would visit. She saved your newspaper clippings. She asked me to show her your Facebook photos because she missed you. She worried she'd failed as a grandmother. I looked at each of them. I told her you were all just busy. I made excuses for you because I didn't want her to feel abandoned. I stood up from the head of the table, this throne of hypocrisy. Quinn, please, Veronica begged. She knew you visited twice in 5 years. She knew you couldn't remember her birthday. She knew the only time you called was to ask about money. I walked toward the door. You want to know what Grandmother Iris really wanted? She wanted her family to visit her. To treat her grandson with basic human decency. We made mistakes, Randall said desperately. But we can change. We're family. You're absolutely right, I said, pausing at the threshold. I met each of their horrified gazes. And I'm giving you exactly what you gave me all these years. I let the words hang in the air. Nothing. The aftermath was a predictable, brutal cascade. The emotional appeals came first, tearful voicemails about second chances. Then the guilt trips. When those failed, the legal challenges began. They contested the will, claiming undue influence and mental incompetence. Their case collapsed within a week. My lawyer presented 6 years of video recordings from my visits with Iris, showing her sharp, analytical mind. The nursing home staff testified about my unwavering presence and their utter absence. The head nurse's testimony was particularly damning. In 6 years, Mr. Patterson never missed a Tuesday. The rest of the family? We saw them maybe twice a year, usually when they needed something signed. 3 months later, the legal battles were exhausted. The inheritance was irrevocably mine. Then, the consequences of their own lives, built on the shaky foundation of expected wealth, came due. Aunt Veronica lost her house. She'd been living on credit, leveraged against her future inheritance. The foreclosure notice was posted on a Tuesday. Uncle Randall's restaurant empire collapsed under debt he could no longer service. The closure was covered in the local paper, a humiliating public spectacle. Cousin Theo's engagement dissolved when his fiancée realized the family money was a mirage. He moved back in with his parents. My parents made one last, desperate play. They showed up at my new, sleek downtown office 6 months later, with tears in their eyes and rehearsed speeches. "We love you," my mother said, her voice trembling. "Money doesn't matter. We just want our son back." "That's beautiful," I replied, not looking up from my work. "Where was that love when I graduated? When I started my company? When I needed you during my divorce?" My father straightened his tie. "We weren't perfect, Quinn, but we can start over. Family is forever." "You're right," I said, meeting his gaze. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a check I'd prepared. "You can start over, just like I did when I stopped expecting anything from you." I handed him a check for $500. "That's what you spent on my birthday gifts over the last decade. Consider us even." The shock and dawning humiliation on their faces was a closure I hadn't known I needed. A year later, I ran into Ava at a coffee shop. She looked tired, stripped of her designer armor, dressed in clothes from a discount store. The aura of entitlement was gone. "Quinn," she said softly, "I know I don't deserve to ask, but could we talk? Really talk?" For the first time, I saw no calculation in her eyes. Only genuine, painful remorse. "I've been thinking about what you said that night," she continued, her voice breaking. "You were right about everything." She started to cry, ugly, real tears. "I've been so angry at you, but the truth is, I'm angry at myself. We all are." "Why?" I asked, the question I'd carried for so long finally voiced. "Because it was easier than admitting we were jealous," she whispered, wiping her eyes with a napkin. "You were always the smartest, the most driven, the most genuine. You built something real while we coasted. And instead of celebrating you, we punished you for it." She wasn't asking for forgiveness or money. She was just offering the truth. I bought her a coffee. We sat for 2 hours as she told me about losing her job, her debt, the fair-weather friends who vanished. "I'm learning what you knew all along," she said, "that the only things worth having are the things you earn yourself." 6 months later, Ava was the only family member I invited to my wedding. She helped plan it, gave a heartfelt speech, and never once mentioned the past or money. She was just my cousin. The rest of the family saw the wedding photos online. Their congratulatory comments, laced with hints of their struggles, were deleted without response. 3 years on, I run a nonprofit in grandmother Iris's name, funding tech education for kids who remind me of my younger self. The construction business is bigger than ever, a tribute to her life's work. Her mansion is now the Iris Patterson Community Center, a place where everyone is meant to feel they belong. Sometimes I wonder if I should have been more forgiving, if I should have shared the wealth and tried to rebuild those burned bridges. Then I remember Tuesday evenings. I remember holding a frail hand, seeing the hope in her eyes fade as the door remained closed, and hearing her whisper, "Why don't they come, Quinn?" And I know I made the only choice I could live with. Some things can't be bought. Forgiveness is one of them. You have to earn it through actions, not words. Through consistency, not convenience. Through presence, not presents. And after 28 years of being a ghost, I finally learned that my presence was a gift. One that had to be deserved, not demanded. The black sheep doesn't always stay with the flock. Sometimes, it finds a better family. Sometimes, it builds its own.